My mother's last words. Don't trust him, she whispered. I finally understood when he showed up at the funeral. I never thought the last words my mother ever spoke to me would change my life forever. She was lying in her hospital bed, her frail body almost swallowed by the tangle of wires and tubes keeping her alive. My mother, Marigold. She had always been larger than life, fiery, stubborn, and fiercely protective. But that day, she looked so small. Her once bright eyes were dim, her voice barely a whisper. Don't trust him, she said, clutching my hand with what little strength she had left. Her words were so faint, I almost didn't catch them. Who, Ma? What are you talking about? I asked, leaning closer, desperate to understand. But she didn't answer. Her hand slipped from mine, and the flatline beep of the monitor filled the room. My mother was gone. I sat there, frozen, her words echoing in my head. Don't trust him. Who was she talking about? What did it mean? It felt like a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. But life has a way of forcing answers on you, whether you're ready or not. The funeral was held a week later in Davenport, Iowa, where my mom had lived her entire life. Davenport's one of those quiet Midwest towns where the air smells like freshly tilled earth, and the Mississippi River flows lazy and wide. Everyone knew Marigold. They came out in droves to pay their respects, filling the small church to capacity. I kept looking for meaning in her last words as the priest droned on. My brother, Gavrin, stood stiffly beside me, staring at the casket like he was trying to burn a hole in it with his eyes. Gavrin and I weren't close. He was the older sibling, the golden boy who'd bailed on the family as soon as he could, leaving me to deal with Mom on my own. He came back for the funeral, though, like he always did for big events, playing the role of the dutiful son for a few days before disappearing again. The service ended, and we moved to the cemetery on the hill for the burial. It was overcast, the kind of gray, cold day that makes everything feel heavier. As the priest recited the final prayers, I felt off. Like someone was watching me. I turned my head and saw a man standing at the edge of the crowd. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't dressed like the rest of us. No suit, no tie. He wore a weathered leather jacket and scuffed boots. Dark sunglasses covered his eyes, even though the sun hadn't shown its face all day. His presence sent a chill through me. There was something about the way he stood there, like he had every right to be at my mother's funeral, even though I was sure I'd never seen him before. When the service ended and people started to leave, he stayed put, staring at the freshly filled grave. I couldn't let it go. My mother's last words kept replaying in my head, making my stomach churn. Don't trust him. Was it him? I walked up to him, my heart pounding in my chest. Can I help you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned his head slowly, like he had all the time in the world. Up close, he looked rough. His face was weathered, with deep lines around his mouth and a faint scar running from his temple to his cheek. You're Marigold's kid, he said, more a statement than a question. Who are you? I demanded. Why are you here? He took a long drag from the cigarette he'd just lit, the smoke curling around his face. Name's Riston, he said, his voice gravelly. I'm here because of your mother. She owed me something. What are you talking about? I snapped. My hands clenched into fists. My mom didn't owe anyone anything. Riston let out a humorless chuckle. You don't know her as well as you think you do, sweetheart. He flicked the ash off his cigarette, like he had all the time in the world. Marigold and I, we go way back. She was a firecracker, your mom. But she made some bad choices. Choices she couldn't walk away from clean. I stared at him, my mind racing. My mother? This didn't make sense. She was the kind of person who made cookies for every bake sale, the one who kept our house spotless and lectured me about crossing the street without looking both ways. She wasn't, whatever this guy was talking about. You're lying, I said, my voice shaking. Believe what you want, he said, his tone almost bored. But I'll tell you this, she took something from me. Something valuable. And now that she's gone, it's on you to make it right. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're insane. I don't know what you're talking about, but whatever it is, it's not my problem. Riston's face hardened. He took a step closer, and I instinctively backed away. Oh, it's your problem, all right. You don't just walk away from someone like me. Your mom should have known that. Before I could respond, Gavrin appeared at my side. He looked between Riston and me, his brow furrowed. What's going on here? He asked. This guy says Ma owed him something, I said, my voice sharp. Says it's our problem now. Gavrin turned to Riston, his jaw tightening. Whatever issues you had with our mother died with her. You need to leave. Riston's lips curled into a smirk. Sure thing, he said, backing away. But you two might want to think long and hard about what your mom was hiding. You'll be hearing from me. After he left, I turned to Gavrin. What the hell was that? I don't know, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. But he wouldn't meet my eyes, and I could tell he was lying. You do know something, I said, my voice rising. Don't even try to deny it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I don't know the details, okay? But, yeah. Mom had a past. Stuff she didn't want us to know about. Like what? I pressed. She used to run with a rough crowd, he admitted reluctantly. Before she married Dad, before we were born. Smuggling, I think. She never told me much, just enough to warn me to stay out of trouble. Smuggling. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. My mother? The woman who made me return every penny I found on the ground because it wasn't ours? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I don't believe this, I said, shaking my head. Why wouldn't she tell us? Because she wanted to protect us, Gavrin said. She left all that behind a long time ago. Or at least, she tried to. But clearly, she hadn't left it all behind. And now, whatever she'd been running from was catching up to us. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. What had she taken from Riston? And why was it so important that he'd come after her family to get it back? As much as I hated to admit it, I needed answers. And I wasn't going to find them sitting around waiting for Riston to make his next move. So I started digging. I started digging through my mom's things that same night. Her house had been untouched since she passed, and stepping inside felt like walking into a time capsule. The familiar scent of her lavender cleaning spray still lingered. Her gardening gloves were on the kitchen counter, a half-finished crossword puzzle lying beside them. It felt wrong, like I was intruding, but I needed to know the truth. I went through everything, her drawers, her closet, the attic. For hours, I found nothing unusual. Just old photos, her favorite recipe books, some junk she'd never gotten rid of. But then, in the back of her wardrobe, I found a small metal box, locked tight. It was heavier than it looked, and the lock was rusted shut. I pried it open with a screwdriver, my hands shaking the whole time. Inside, there was a bundle of papers, yellowed with age. Old letters, receipts, and a faded photograph. The photo caught my attention first. It was my mom, young, maybe in her 20s, standing on a dock with 3 men. One of them was Riston. The other 2 I didn't recognize. They all looked rough, like the kind of people you wouldn't want to cross. My mom was smiling in the picture, but there was something in her eyes. Fear, maybe. Or regret. Underneath the photo, I found the real treasure, a map. It was hand-drawn, marked with an X near the river, just outside of town. There was no explanation, no note, but I knew this was what Riston was after. Whatever my mom had taken from him, it had to be buried there. The next day, I called Gavrin. He showed up looking tired, like he'd barely slept. I handed him the map and the photo. This is what Riston wants, I said. We need to figure out what's buried there before he does. He stared at the map for a long moment before nodding. We'll go tonight. Less chance of running into him. That evening, we drove out to the spot marked on the map. It was an old storage yard by the river, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. The place was abandoned, quiet except for the distant hum of the water. We brought shovels and a flashlight, following the map to a patch of dirt near an old oak tree. The ground was hard, packed tight from years of neglect, but we dug anyway. My arms ached, my hands blistered, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. After what felt like hours, the shovel hit something solid. I dropped to my knees and started brushing away the dirt with my hands. It was a metal chest, about the size of a toolbox. The lock was rusted, but Gavrin broke it open with the flat edge of his shovel. Inside was a necklace, glittering even in the dim light. It wasn't just any necklace, it was massive, encrusted with diamonds and emeralds, the kind of thing you'd see in a museum. Alongside it was a wad of cash, bundled tightly, and a revolver, its handle worn with use. Holy shit, Gavrin whispered. This is it. This is what she took. I stared at the necklace, my heart pounding. It was beautiful, but it radiated danger. My mom must have known what taking this would mean. She must have known it would follow her forever. Before we could decide what to do, headlights cut through the darkness. A black car pulled up, its engine rumbling like a threat. Riston stepped out, flanked by 2 men who looked just as mean as he did. They were armed, and they didn't bother hiding it. Well, look at that, Riston drawled, his voice cold and mocking. You kids did all the hard work for me. Hand it over. I stepped in front of the chest, my hands clenched into fists. You don't scare me, I said, even though my voice wavered. This belonged to my mom. You don't deserve it. Riston laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But let me make this simple, either you give me what's mine, or I take it. Your choice. Gavin shifted beside me, his hand inching toward the revolver in the chest. But before he could grab it, Riston's men raised their guns. "Don't even think about it," one of them growled. I had to think fast. I glanced at the necklace, then back at Riston. "You want this so bad? Fine. Take it." I picked up the necklace and threw it toward him. It landed a few feet in front of him, glittering in the dirt. Riston smirked, stepping forward to pick it up. That's when Gavin made his move. He grabbed the revolver and fired. The shot echoed through the yard, and one of Riston's men went down, clutching his leg. Chaos erupted. Riston dove for cover, shouting orders, but Gavin didn't stop. He fired again, forcing them to retreat toward their car. I grabbed the chest, struggling under its weight, and shouted, "Let's go." We ran, ducking behind trees as more shots rang out. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We made it to Gavin's truck, throwing the chest into the back and peeling out of there before Riston could regroup. When we got home, we sat in silence, both of us too shaken to speak. Finally, Gavin broke the silence. "What now?" I stared at the chest, at the necklace that had caused so much trouble. "We destroy it," I said. "All of it. The necklace, the cash, the gun. Everything." He nodded, and that's exactly what we did. We drove to an old quarry outside of town and threw the chest into the deepest part of the lake. Watching it sink, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. My mom had carried this burden for years, and now it was gone. But so was the last piece of her I'd had left. Riston never came after us again. Maybe he realized it wasn't worth it. Or maybe he just didn't want to risk another fight. Either way, I knew we'd won. My mom's secret was buried, just like she was, and I wasn't going to let it haunt us anymore. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why my mom made the choices she did. But I do know one thing, she did it for us. And in the end, that's all that matters.